Hi folks, this is Double Wings. Today I actually prepared some paper for what I'm going to be talking, because usually I never do this. I just sit here and start blabbering away, and whatever came to mind I try to frame it in a grammatically correct way. That's about it. But today I actually did some preparation. The reason I did this is because it's a big topic. We're going to be talking about U.S.-China trade and the current trade war that's ongoing. Now, most people, if you are not paying too much attention to this matter, would assume that the entire reason for the trade war is because of the huge Chinese surplus in the U.S.-China trade, and the U.S. tried to balance its deficit. But the reality is much more complicated than this. I have categorized the U.S.-China trade issues into three categories. Number one category is, like everybody knows, it's because of the huge deficit that U.S. is suffering from the U.S.-China trade. We know that China has promised to purchase $1 trillion of U.S. goods in the next 6 years. I think recently it has been upgraded to 1.5 trillion or 1.2 trillion. Now, the Chinese communists never view this as an issue because they have all the money. So if they need to buy more, they'll buy more. But U.S. have to realize that that's not a solution to the U.S. Export deficits. I give you an example, soybeans. If China is buying, say, 1 billion tons of soybeans from U.S., and for $1 per ton, that's just for example, maybe it costs more, let's say $100 per ton. Okay, so, but China only needs half of that for its domestic consumption. So what China is going to do with the remaining half, the 500 million tons of soybeans? So they will try to sell it to the rest of the world, right? And now, let's say U.S. has total of 1.5 billion tons of soybeans and sold China 1 billion. So U.S. need to sell the remaining 500 million to the rest of the country, to the rest of the world. But China is also trying to sell the 500 million that China bought extra from U.S. Now, what China is going to do is going to devalue their soybeans that they purchased from U.S. They bought it from U.S., I just said, $100 per ton. They're going to sell it at $90 per ton. So other countries, of course, will buy the Chinese soybeans, because it's the same soybeans as the U.S. ones, but it's $10 cheaper. So as a result, U.S. still don't get any increase in its exporting soybeans. So my point is, if just by Chinese buying U.S. goods, it's not gonna correct the U.S. trade deficit issue. So that's the reason that just by Chinese buying extra U.S. goods, no matter how much more extra they buy, it's not going to solve the problem. The second point regarding the trade deficit is about tariffs. We know Trump has slammed 10% tariffs on about 200 billion of Chinese goods, and if the trade talk falls apart, another 15% extra for a total of 25% tariffs will be slammed down all Chinese goods, which is about 350 billion in total. So almost double the current merchandise that's been tariffed. The market has reacted negatively to this impending tariff increase, but I do not think this will come to fruition. I think U.S.-China will sign a trade deal sometimes in the near future. So this tariff thing will resolve with the signing of a trade deal. However, I do suggest the U.S. to keep at least a small percentage of tariffs on Chinese goods, say 3% or 5%, not to decrease to zero. One reason is to put continuous pressure on the Chinese government. Secondly, is by maintaining a small percentage of tariffs, the U.S. can monitor Chinese export to U.S. much more effectively and take appropriate action if needed, if there's any signs of Chinese dumping their goods in the U.S. market, for example. The second category of issues is regarding intellectual property theft. Now, this category has three issues. Number one is the Chinese government has been forcing Western companies to transfer technology to the Chinese in order to do business in China, which is, of course, unlawful. But the Western companies, because they want the big Chinese market, a lot of times they buckle under the pressure. So the Trump administration has demanded China to scrap that policy, and China has agreed to remove this practice. So this issue is pretty much resolved. The second issue under intellectual property theft is about infringement on patented intellectual properties, which is ubiquitous in China. I myself had to admit I was guilty of doing that when I was visiting China in the past. For example, they have bootleg DVDs, and they have bootlegged Armani's and Versace's or whatever. It's ubiquitous in China. So I think that the Chinese government had the will to stamp down on this in the past, and they were likely promised to do something about it this time too. But the trouble is, how are they going to enforce it? I've observed how the little people doing this sort of business in alleyways and in little market stalls. They will just hide it when the inspectors are around, and then they'll take it out to sell people when the lookouts are telling them it's safe. There's no inspectors around. So what I'm trying to say is, it's a very difficult thing to enforce, even if the Chinese government promised to clamp down on this kind of patent infringement. The third point is more serious. It's about Chinese spies stealing high-tech technologies from U.S. companies or even U.S. government. With this issue, the Chinese government is likely to vehemently deny this practice, although I believe it's likely have happened many times. Being a Chinese myself, I kind of understand how the Chinese people think, and and how much they like to cut corners. If rather than spending money and time in developing a high technology, it's much easier just to steal it or copy it. Now, what the U.S. government's going to do about this if Chinese government wouldn't admit to even committing this misdeed? The U.S. is serious about getting a trade deal. They have to let the Chinese to save face. They may have a secret agreement that that China will pay a penalty for the past and current misdeeds, meaning stealing high technologies from private companies and public sector. U.S. will not demand China to openly admit of doing it on paper, but they can have a secret understanding that China promises not to do that in the future, at the same time paying a big fine for the theft they've done in the past. The third category of the trade dispute is the most difficult one to resolve because it involves structural change. U.S. demands China has a structural change in how it runs its society. Now, there's two major issues under this category. Number one is Chinese government gives huge subsidies to certain companies to help them to monopolize the world market. And these companies like Huawei, in return, will be a willing participant as a tool for the Chinese government. For example, spying, stealing technology. So when U.S. demand Chinese government to withdraw these kind of subsidies, China will likely say, sure, we'll stop it. But how is the U.S. going to double check that it's not doing it secretly, using some auxiliary methods? For example, claiming that Huawei was adopting a environmentally friendly practice, so it's rewarded this amount of money for doing that. We all know this environmental issues is such a darling in the world, right? And the U.S. probably cannot intervene for China rewarding a company for being environmentally friendly. This is just an example. There's many other ways China can secretly subsidize Huawei or companies like Huawei. So how is the U.S. going to have a effective supervision over this? That has to be ironed out. The second main issue under the structural change category is China's resistance to open up most of its market to the world, especially in financial institutions such as banks and fields involving the free flow of information, such as education, media, internet. Now, this issue China will resist with all its will, and they probably will rather go to nuclear war with the U.S. than to change this practice, because if once they allow the free flow of information, then their brainwashing of the people will be over, and their control of the country will be over. So they will never open up the internet. They will never allow free media to go into China. So if the U.S. wish to risk a war with China, go ahead and insist on this issue. But otherwise, U.S. probably should be careful on treading this particular issue. Now, these are the three major categories of US-China war. My prediction is that Trump will sign a trade deal in the near future with China. The terms, just as I listed before, they will not force China to open up internet. They will probably take some money or a fine from China for its past and current theft behavior without openly exposing it. And of course they will accept extra Chinese buying of US goods. Why do I predict that Trump will sign this deal? The main reason is Trump is in its first term and he wants to be re-elected. If the trade talk falls apart and US increase the tariffs, Chinese economy is gonna collapse, and then the whole world economy will go down. The U.S. economy probably not going to collapse, but the stock market is going to crash. We're going to have a repeat of 2008 or even worse. And with the re-election coming on next year, Trump cannot afford such a calamity. And because economy is his strong point, if he can't even hold the economy, then he will never be voted in again. So that's what I based on my prediction on, that Trump does not want to see China collapse now. However, after Trump's re-election, then Trump can certainly do whatever he wants to. If he wish to be like Reagan, Ronald Reagan caused the Soviet to collapse. Maybe Trump want to cause the Chinese communists to collapse in the end, but he will only do it on his second term. So my suggestion to US is, besides keep a low percentage of tariffs, also make sure there is a inspectoral system in place. Make sure that China follows through what it promises on a trade deal. Number two is make this trade deal temporary, or it will be reviewed, say every 2 years. Then, if Trump gets in again, he gets a chance to review this deal, and if it's not to his satisfaction, he can certainly escalate a trade war at that time. My hope is that China will eventually become a democratic country with the rule of the law, but of course it's not the US's concern to see that happen. It's up to the Chinese people to make the change. It's only reasonable for Trump to look after US interests because he's the US president. But I hope that President Trump has Reagan's ambitions, and he will not only get the best deal for the US people, but also give some hope to the Chinese. Thanks for listening. Bye.